I absolutely love Nintendo boss battles. They're all super fun, creative, and they're cool ways into introducing new areas in the game. But Nintendo likes to do something that's really odd, is they have a specific style of boss that they repeat time and time again. It's the quote-unquote floating head and hands boss. No matter the franchise or what game or series it comes from, Nintendo seems to really love these hands and head bosses, and they seem to incorporate them many times, and they're actually pretty unique. And that's why it's our job today to go through the list of the many different head and hand bosses. I'm gonna get tired of saying that. But we need to look at them all in a giant collection and see what is the top 10 best hand and head bosses in Nintendo games. Before we get started, if you guys are new to the channel, go ahead and feel free to subscribe if you enjoy and like the video to keep the videos rolling and keep the channel up to date. Hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all things I post. But thank you guys for tuning in, and on to the video. Number 10, Knuckle-Tech from Super Mario Odyssey. This is a recent one in the entry as it only came out about 2 years ago. Super Mario Odyssey is a game about capturing enemies and everything around you, and you can actually do that to this boss. This boss is once again, of course, a floating head with hands, and it tries to punch Mario. Mario can actually capture one of his fists and drive it right back into his face, which is an absolutely satisfying thing. The only thing that takes away from this boss is it's a simple 3-hit and then he's dead like every other Mario boss, and he's really not that difficult compared to the rest on this list. And the rest kind of did it first, so this one had to be pushed towards the end. Number 9, Robo-Kong, Mario vs. Donkey Kong Game Boy Advance. This game is something that I started off with as a young age, and it is somewhat of a nostalgia point for me, and I clearly didn't fall in love with the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games in the future. But with that aside, this game is definitely the best one for me, and I just love the Donkey Kong battles because they really involve Mario just throwing hands at Donkey Kong, throwing barrels, throwing all kinds of things he can, but Donkey Kong gets clever at the very end of the game and creates this giant robotic version of himself where he is keeping the mini Marios hostage in his fist. In order to beat him, you'll have to ride his fist to the top, grab a barrel and throw it at the glass, making the robot explode at the end. It's an absolutely fun battle because stuff will start falling from the sky thanks to the robot, and you'll have to flip Mario over and knock him down with your feet. It's really dynamic and it's really clever. Number 8, Tiki Tong from Donkey Kong Country Returns. This game was an amazing comeback for the Donkey Kong Country franchise. Not as good as Tropical Freeze, but an amazing comeback nevertheless. But the island is inhabited by these tiki creatures that are making the animals fall in delusion and attacking Donkey Kong and stealing all of his bananas to make more tikis. Well, Donkey Kong finally gets to the end of the level and has to traverse this giant mountain to reach the top with this giant tiki head of rest named Tiki Tong. Tiki Tong is this giant bongo with hands, and he is actually a pretty difficult boss the very first time. You have to dodge his hand attacks, which are very quick. He'll try to slap you, slice you, and even karate chop you. Eventually, you'll get to his head, and after breaking his hands and turning them all back into bananas, but you'll have to bounce on the button that's on top of his head in order to completely defeat him at the very end and get back the banana horde that is yours. Number 7, Brobot Type L, Super Paper Mario. Super Paper Mario is one of those weird games that doesn't follow the same path as the other games in the franchise. It's not really an RPG as much as it is an action-adventure RPG, where it plays mostly like a 2D platformer. But either way, there's an amazing boss in this game called Mr. L, and apparently you'll find out in the game, spoiler alerts, it's Luigi, and he's hypnotized to be this alter ego of himself. So pretty much he's this villain, and he creates this robot called the Ultra Brobot, and this is the L type, which it's different from the regular one because this one has hands, and that's why it makes this list. It's an absolutely fun boss to play around with and just catch it on fire with Bowser or just start taking down his hands, period. Now, unlike most of the bosses on this list, you don't just take down his hands in order to get to the head. You can take him down all together in one swift blow by throwing bombs or having Bowser once again breathe fire on him. But for the robot himself, he can actually shoot rockets at you or even lasers out of his eyes, and he has a pretty cool moveset. So he made the list just because it's Brobot L. Come on, it's Mr. L. How do you not like him? Number 6, Bongo Bongo from The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So we're back with the drums again, or at least in this case, the drummer, as we go into the well and into the deep shadow temple to finally reach the evil that is Bongo Bongo. Bongo Bongo is this evil creature that was sealed away many years ago by the Sheikah tribe, and it eventually gets out and starts taking over Kakariko Village. This is a creepy character, and lots of YouTubers have made videos separately just on the lore of this guy. But anyways, Link goes to fight him, and his main attack is playing the drum. He'll beat the drum every now and then, but then attack you while he's invisible. So Link has to use the lens of truth in order to see exactly where he is at all times, because he will sneak up on Link. It is your job to shoot the hands with arrows to stun them and eventually shoot his eye, which is this giant red circle that charges at you, but you once again need the lens of truth in order to see it. I think most of this boss is so cool is because of how scary it is and the fact that you can't see it. When you can't see something, it becomes 10 times scarier, and that's why Bongo Bongo made this list. Number 5, Andross, Star Fox Zero, Star Fox 64. So Andross is this creepy space intergalactic evil scientist that wants us to take over the Lilat system. He wants to take over everything, of course, every bad guy ever, we know. Moving on. He ends up doing some type of weird experiment to himself, making his head grow to massive proportions and losing all of his body limbs besides his hands. Now, there's two games where you could really talk about the best boss here, because I think they both do it really good. Star Fox Zero may not be heavily loved, but the version of Andross here was really cool, as it was a giant robotic head half of the time, and you had to go in and do a separate amount of battle while using the Walker form of the R-Wing. And in Star Fox 64, you actually ended up battling his brain at the end and making it explode. But both of these games, you had to escape this route and this cool little high-speed runaway, kind of like in Metroid games, and you were led by none other than James McCloud, Star Fox's dad. Number 4, Mazal, The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. So Mazal is this weird, very underutilized boss that no one really talks about because it is not a really high up there game on people's list. But I think it's a really cool concept to get really small and see the world at a different point of view, and that's exactly how they take this boss. So first off, you have to take out the hands in this boss with arrows. You have to disable them in order to disable the head. And once the head is disabled, you can shrink down into tiny proportion and get inside of the head. Not only once you're in do you just attack, but you have to use the mitts in order to dig around the dirt in order to find the weak spot and start striking the podium. This is a combination of multiple items in one and really utilizes everything that Link has learned up to this point to fight this boss. And it's not even like near the end yet. This is an amazing example of boss creation from Nintendo. Number 3, Bouldergeist from Super Mario Galaxy. When you reach this area of the game, you realize something's not quite right. There's this giant arena and there's no one standing there. And you know, there's a Luma offering to give you extra life. Something's about to go down. As soon as you step on the platform, a whole bunch of rocks fly in and create this creature of scary proportions, I guess you could say. You learn earlier on in the galaxy, in order to get through certain obstacles, you'll need to use these boos and grab them by their tongue and slam them into obstacles in order to make them explode. And that's exactly kind of what you have to do here. He unleashes these boos and you have to grab them by their tongue to take out his hands and then his body. His hands doesn't grow until the second phase, and there's only 2 phases, but they are extremely long because once you take out his body and he grows the hands, it's going to take a while. Each hand is about 2 to 3 hits separate, and he also shoots out spikes and all kinds of other attacks and tries to punch you, even though his punches are really slow. And then, after you take out his head, a little creature will start floating around with like a little uvula, and you have to spin it around and slam it on stuff. So it's just, there's many cool things about this boss, and I just absolutely love Bouldergeist. Number 2, DJ Octavio. Now, I wasn't really sure which one to put on this list, from Splatoon 1 or 2, and I really had to think about how the boss battles went. And it's without saying the Splatoon 1 boss battle was the most hype and it was the better one. It was longer and it was more intense. It actually had the music going and everything, but it was pretty cool. It was DJ Octavio. Even though this isn't really technically a head, it is a body with 2 floating hands, or they're kind of it's a body with hands, okay? It works. So anyways, he tries to punch you with these hands and you have to shoot him back with your ink splatter. And he'll eventually shoot out a giant bomb that you'll have to shoot back as well. In Splatoon 2, it's kind of the same exact thing, but instead of going throughout this giant room, you're stuck in one place, and then at the end you're using the Rainmaker to shoot his hands and then eventually plant it on top of his face. So both of these bosses are technically the same, but the first one did it first and it did it better. And of course, before I get to my number 1 pick, I have some honorable mentions. Now, it's worth noting that some of these are actually really good boss battles, but I didn't quite classify them as head and hand bosses because they had some arms and other limbs, and it was just not quite floating hands and heads. But here's honorable mentions nevertheless. Number 1, Magolor, Kirby Returns to Dreamland. Magolor has a weird story because he is just a small little friendly alien that comes crash landing and blames it on some 3-headed dragons, and it's actually not their fault. It's Magolor setting everything up so that Kirby can help him collect his pieces to his ship and also help him to collect the crown in order to turn him into his ultimate form. His ultimate form is actually crazy. He grows these giant hands and he's able to summon all kind of projectiles and toss them at Kirby, but it isn't until he gets into his soul form where things start taking a turn. Magolor then gains the ability to use super power-ups similar to Kirby, where he can attack with either a giant hammer, a sword, and other multiple attacks where he'll even bounce around the screen. So Magolor is actually a real foe to be threatened with, and it's actually really difficult, especially the X version of him in True Arena, but he's a really fun boss to fight, and he appears time and time again as little cameos in future Kirby games, and I just love Magolor. I think he's an epic boss, and he was a lot of fun to fight.